Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Jinn and Tonic Show. I'm your host, Almighty Atheismo. Today with me is Captain Disguise, Stopspamming, Klingschor, and Rationalizer, and we are discussing embryology. If you want to call in and discuss with the panel the topic of your own choosing or the topic of today, it's all fine with us. Just send a Skype contact request to the Jinn and Tonic Show. Do not call into the show. We will call you when we're ready to take guests. And we are going to kick it over to Captain Disguise. Captain Disguise has written a definitive rebuttal to the IERA's paper on embryology, and he's posted a video explaining the paper, and he's posted the paper itself, where we'll post on the video where you can download the entire thing and read it in full. It's very meticulous and very thorough, and he's going to go over some of the highlights of this today, and so take it away, Captain Disguise.
Well, hello there. So, as Atheismo said, I just finished writing a paper that I've been working on for about a year. And it's in response to a paper called Embryology in the Quran, a scientific linguistic analysis of chapter 23 by someone named Hamza Tzortzis. And he released that about a year ago. And this was in response to a very embarrassing situation they put themselves in, involving P.Z. Myers at the Atheist Convention. Of that is just background information, but at the end of it, what Tzortzis has done is claim that the verses in the Quran convey some kind of deeper meaning, and that if he does something called lexical analysis, what he calls lexical analysis, and he claims that if you perform a lexical analysis, you're able to get a whole range of information from the Quran. And the information ranges from sperm cells to egg cells to fertilization to zygotes to somite development and organogenesis and musculoskeletal development. All of that is contained in the following two verses in the Quran. And these verses are chapter 23, verses 13 to 14. And here's the English translation. Then we made the small amount of semen into a blood clot, and we made the blood clot into a piece of flesh, and we made the piece of flesh bones, and we covered the bones with flesh, and then we developed him into another creation. So those are the verses that are supposed to tell you everything from sperm cells to fertilization to zygotes and whatnot.
So someone raised the question, where is the egg in that description?
Right. So that's where Hamza's lexical analysis comes in. But before I get into that, let me just give you a very brief description of what the verses are actually saying. There are like five points, which are semen, blood clot, a piece of flesh, and the flesh wrapping around bones. Now, let me just be blunt about it. Just think of what a 7th century person could observe. Well, he could observe that semen goes in and baby comes out. That's pretty obvious to everyone. And the baby has blood, flesh, and bones. And you put all of that together, you get everything in the verses. That's all there is. So, the entire embryology claim that the Muslims have been touting for the last 30 years just boils down to that. Just simple observation, nothing more, nothing less.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of claims in the Quran that many modern apologists are trying to pass off as miracles is, someone saying, "Behold how blue the sky is, for Allah is merciful and really smart." And they'll say, well, how did they know? How did they know before we had, done this or that, or modern Western science had discovered that? And I thought, well, pretty sure the sky's blue most places. Don't know what is so miraculous about that. There's a lot of, everyone remembers the 2 episodes we did with Nadir Ahmed and how underwhelming a lot of his claims were. But Klingschor, you had a comment?
Well, yeah, I just wanted to say that's the remarkable thing about embryology in the Quran, is that it's so unimpressive. It's things that Muhammad well, we know he knew. Like, nutfa, gee, do you think Muhammad knew what semen was? We only have a bunch of hadiths where his wife Aisha bint Abu Bakr would wash it off his clothes. So, no, there's no way he could have known what semen was. Did he know what is there any way he could have known what, like, an embryo looked like? It's not like we even have, like, all these hadiths where one of his detractors threw a camel embryo on him, or where his followers came to him and said, hey, are we allowed to eat camel embryos? Or maybe it was a sheep embryo, and Muhammad was like, you may indeed eat the sheep embryo. It's not like we have hadiths like that in Sahih al-Bukhari, right? Or even the fact that Muhammad made jurisprudence, fiqh, on the issue of abortions, and when a woman has, is hit in the stomach and her little embryo comes out, except that we do, ergo, like, there's nothing here. There's no miracle. Islamic tradition itself tells us that he knew what embryos were because he was experiencing them in real life. Like, it's remarkable. It's remarkable how idiotic this claim is.
Sorry, the Rationalizer had a comment, but really quick, I'd like to ask Klingschor, the fiqh ruling that you're talking about, is it if two men are fighting and a pregnant woman gets hit in the stomach? Is that the situation?
Let me find you the exact hadith, but I believe it's something along those lines.
If that's what it says, then he lifted it directly out of the Old Testament. Anyway, the Rationalizer.
It was just that Nadir Ahmed was mentioned.
You're a bit quiet for me, Rash. I don't know if that's for everyone.
Yeah, same. You're
right,
like a pixie.
Nadir Ahmed was mentioned, and I think we can all agree that he didn't bring the most convincing arguments. It was the second time he'd been on the show, so he's probably had about 4 or 5 hours of presenting these arguments. And he's been writing to me in emails, challenging me to have a debate with him about scientific errors in the Quran. And I just wrote to him and said, I don't think this will be interesting. And he's like, how can you say that? You've got an entire channel dedicated to scientific errors in the Quran. I said, no, I didn't want to say this, but it wouldn't be interesting with you. And then the guy's written back and he said he's going to put on his website how I'm a coward and stuff. And then he called me a fink. So I just thought I'd mention because at some point he's going to probably badmouth me on his channel, but I just thought I'd mention it before it happened.
No one will watch it. Anyway, Captain, you had more?
Yeah, was I on mute?
No, we can hear you.
Okay. I was about to mention that everything Klingschor just said about, the shape of the embryo is wholly apart from the fact that the Quran or the Hadith gives no description of what the embryo looks like at any point. It never even attempts to do that. So, that's just another point. But what I was getting at was the fact that, anyone who looks at the verses in the Quran from that skeptical and bit, critical perspective would realize that there's absolutely nothing in it that's actually impressive, or that's gonna make our ice drop or whatever. And apart from that, we also have reason to believe that whatever was said, all the embryological verses that were said, was also understood by everyone in Muhammad's time. If you could look at verse 22:5, which also is very similar to 23:12 to 14, is the verses that most Muslims talk about. 22:5 starts by saying, one second. 22:5 starts by saying, O people, if you should be in doubt about the resurrection, then consider that indeed we created you from dust, then from a nutfa, then from an alaka, then from a mudga. It's basically the same as 23:13 to 14, but the beginning says, it's asking the people to consider what Muhammad is saying. So, when you say something like that, obviously the people you're talking to had to have an idea of what is being said, right? And apart from that, you're not going to find any hadiths where the people said, oh, I have no idea what Muhammad is talking about. He's, saying something that, none of them knew. You're never going to find such a hadith or anything. So all the evidences from the hadith or the Quran are in line with the fact that everything that was said was something that had to be known at the time.
You know what? It reminds me of there's a verse in the New Testament where Jesus is addressing this crowd, and he gives this parable that's supposed to be this metaphor for how the mechanics of salvation work, or how God runs his kingdom. And it actually says, when Jesus was finished speaking, not a single person there understood what it was that he was trying to say. But in Muhammad's case, you often have defenders of the religion saying, oh, well, this word means that, and this is more cryptic than it might seem, that's not what this means, and so forth, and playing games with the language or with the turns of phrase, and trying to sort of retroactively create idioms so that they can remap the meanings of certain verses or hadiths or other comments attributed to him. But there's never any verse equivalent to like that one in the New Testament. There's never any indication, based on the biographical information that survives, that the people had a hard time understanding what he was getting at. It seems like they had already the knowledge base to understand what it was that he meant, and in addition, it suggests that he was very sort of plain spoken about it. Oh, but before I go back to you, Stopspamming had his hand up.
Okay, this is long past because I was going to do the intro to this but I don't want to take now the whole thing and turn it upside down, because what I wanted to say is that, Captain, what you have done is you've refuted the contents, like I think all of us have done, showing that there is no embryology in the Quran and just creationism. But Hamza, when you showed him some errors, he made changes, but he's never admitted that outside criticism prompted the changes. But what I wanted to point out is that you have now done something different, because you've taken his exegesis and the textual approach and matched it. In other words, just like James Randi exposes dowsers and earpiece artists and charlatans, you've taken on those claims word by word. And this is the different approach that I see here. And what you are showing is what the words really mean and what tricks Hamza is using. And I was going to say, can you give us an example of those?
Yeah, I was going to get into that. So basically what I've done with my paper is I've actually done lexical analysis. So I've done what Hamza claimed to actually do. But before I get into that, just one last point about the unimpressiveness of the verses in the Quran. Like you said, there's no indication that people ever had, a doubt of what they meant. Apart from that, you should also look at why the embryological verses even exist in the Quran. If you look at the exegesis of a 14th century scholar named Ibn Kathir, he states that the embryological verses were supposed to be evidence of the God's ability to perform resurrection. Basically, the pagan Arabs did not believe in resurrection, and they did not believe their bodies could resurrect. This was Muhammad's evidence that Muhammad made an analogy that, if God could create you from semen, he could clearly bring you back from the dead. So, Muhammad needed his people to understand what he was saying. So clearly, everything just, falls into line that the people at his time had to know what Muhammad was talking about. So, Muslims, I think, have to accept it, but this is where they kind of get a bit tricky. They say that, although the people at the time knew everything, the words used in the Quran are so special that if you, just take a deeper look at it, it's going to reveal all these information about sperms and ovum and zygotes and fertilization and implantation and blastocysts and organogenesis and, blah, blah, blah. So, that's how, Muslims kind of deal with that situation, I would say, even though the people knew at the time, the words in the Quran are so special that, 1,400 years later, it allows Muslims to confirm what whatever science has proven.
Klingschor has his hand up.
Uh-huh.
Oh, I just wanted to say that, there's a hadith from the Muwatta of Imam Malik, which just goes into so much detail on the fetus of a free woman or a slave woman, and it actually says, right, listen to this. Malik said, the fetus is not alive unless it cries at birth. If it comes out of its mother's womb and cries and then dies, the complete blood money is to be paid, etc., etc., etc. So these guys clearly, the Arabs clearly had like an intimate knowledge of embryos and just from is it what's the type of abortion that's just natural where nature just punches you in the stomach? Is that right? That kind of abortion, and also the fact that the Arabs weren't vegetarian, from what I can gather, i.e. they were killing animals, and every now and again they'd find an embryo. I mean, just to give you one example, in Sunan Abu Dawood, it's narrated that Abu Sa'id al-Khudri said, I asked the Apostle of Allah about the embryo. He replied, eat it if you wish. So, I mean, Muhammad, and then again, in another version it says, we slaughtered a she-camel, a cow, and a sheep, and we found an embryo in its womb. And they asked Muhammad, should we throw it away or eat it? And Muhammad replied, eat it if you wish. The slaughter of the mother serves its slaughter. So they knew what embryos and fetuses were, according to Islamic tradition.
Really quick before we go to the Rationalizer, this is a bit off topic, but I think it's a pretty good question. Someone asked me, from where did the black stone in the Kaaba mosque and the Kaaba itself, where did these things originate, and how did they become significant in the Islamic tradition? Klingschor, why don't you start off?
It's kind of actually, well, generally it's thought that the stone was sent down to Adam, I believe. I'm kind of sketchy on the subject because I don't really care about it. It's just kind of Islam fairy tale background stuff. It isn't in the Quran, but
I'll step in then. The black stone is considered to be the remnant of a meteorite or something of this nature. Nobody has ever been allowed to analyze it to see what it actually consists of, and
except for that Shiite leader.
Yeah, except for a particular leader of a sect called the Karmadians, who they actually were they were a sect just bent on antagonizing the mainstream Sunni Muslims. So that's I mean, he asked about the origin, but yeah, it's a good story, so I'll tell it anyway, really quick. At one point, the Karmadians, in just to be jerks, and also to kind of undermine, to say, okay, well, why? Where is your God now? One of those kinds of moments. They sent in a group of warriors. They either snuck past the security or killed selected guards, got in there, took the black stone, carried it away to this fortress on the east side of the Arab Peninsula, and the leader of the Karmadians actually put the black stone in his privy and urinated and defecated on it for, I forget how many months or years. And then they finally ransomed it back. They paid this large sum in gold, and in exchange, the Karmadians sent a person in who just threw a sack on the ground, and when they opened it, the black stone was in there, and it was just caked with feces. But they put it back in place as it was, and that was the end of that chapter.
And Muslims have been kissing it ever since.
That's correct. Muslims have been, and there is actually a story. I don't know how reliable it was, that they were not allowed to to really thoroughly clean it, because for ceremonial purposes that wasn't permitted. So it was still really quite filthy when they put it back, and people were still kissing it and had feces stuck in their beards. But as far as the origin of the stone is concerned, it was believed both by tradition and by some secular analysts to be the remnant of a meteorite, and that the pagans thought, okay, well, something falls down from the skies, which we think of as mysterious. They must have some significance. So it became an object, and they put it in the corner of this the Kaaba, which originally housed all these different alcoves for all these different deities that the pagans would worship, as sort of a one-stop shop for worshiping all of the different gods they believed. And what happened was, in the tradition, Muhammad claimed that the Kaaba and the stone were really originally the part of the religion of the true believers. What they didn't refer to themselves like that Tom Holland talks about. They refer to themselves as the believers, not as Muslims. That title, that demonym came later. But he said, okay, well, Adam, the very first man, built laid the foundation for the first site of the original Kaaba, and then it got destroyed in the flood, and then it was rebuilt later by later prophets. But he says originally it was of the true Abrahamic faith of the the God, Allah, Yahweh, whatever you want to call him, and that the pagans, like hermit crabs, had moved in and co-opted it for their own purposes, and that he was just bringing it back. Now, there's an interesting hadith by Umar where he himself kissed the stone, and he said, well, he made a remark indicating that he was confused as to how this practice came about himself. He said, to me, you are just a stone, but I have seen the Prophet, who knows best, acting reverently in this manner, so I will as well, because he knows best. So, I mean, I think that maybe even he and some of the other Muslims were uncomfortable with the mixed message it sent with the worship of objects or idolatry. I remember way back when, I'm sorry, I know I'm going on one of my longer rants, I see people have their hands up. There was I think it was Thunderfoot put up a vid saying, I won't be talked to in a certain way by people who, worship or bow down and worship to pray to, an object that's in a city that no non-believer can come. He said that was hypocritical of them to stand in judgment when, this was kind of very symbolic. And someone issued a rebuttal to him saying, they're not worshiping the Kaaba. It's just the point that they're facing, and that distinction makes a difference. Now, I would split hairs with that person, because while, of course, they're not worshiping the stone, and they're not worshiping a stone cube in the form of the Kaaba or the mosque itself, the focal point that they are focusing on is not as different from the practice of idolatry as they would have you believe. What the tradition in Islam says is that the point that the Kaaba mosque is on is opposite a point in heaven that is sort of closest to the earth, and that's the, I forget, the Dar something. It's like the opposite house of it's like closest to the throne of God, I think is the way they put it, right? Now, obviously, they're not worshiping the materials out of which this mosque is built, but neither do idolaters, and this is a common straw man of idol, we call them idol worshiping cultures. But if you go to whether you're talking about Egyptians, Greeks, or anyone who have ever built statues of their gods, or whether you're talking about like a very primitive low-tech culture on an island somewhere in the South Pacific, if they build, if they just make a pile of stones and then they bow down towards it, they're not worshiping the stones. And this is where I think a lot of the Abrahamic traditions really strawman the pagan religions, is that these are, if you build a statue representing Apollo, you're not worshiping the statue. You're just using this as a focal point, so it's not as different as they would have you believe. Okay, but now Rationalizer and Klingschor have... we'll go Rash first. Rash has been waiting a while. And sorry I went on long, but...
I think he said something like, I know you're just a stone with no ability to harm me or do me good, and I don't know why I kiss you, and I wouldn't accept that I'd seen Muhammad do it before me, or something like that. I know which one you mean. The point about the throne, Mecca being the closest point to the throne of Allah, if you imagine a static earth, geocentric universe, everything goes around the earth, and then Allah's throne at the top of it, that would make sense. Once, however, you start to factor in the fact that the earth is a spheroid and it rotates and it goes around the sun, that would mean not that Allah is the center of the universe, but that Earth is the center of Allah's universe. Allah spins around on his throne every 24 hours around the Earth, and every 365 days around the sun, just so that Mecca can be the closest part to the bottom of his throne.
That's the first observation I made. I said the throne of God is a very nauseous place because God is basically on a teacup ride at the carnival. He's spinning in multiple directions, spinning in place, and then going around and up and down and shifting. Klingschor, you had something.
Oh, I just wanted to mention, you couldn't hear me laughing, but I never thought of that before. God's just hanging onto the edge of his throne. God, so fast. Anyway, yeah. Actually, according to Maxine Robinson, in pre-Islamic Arabia, it was actually very common for the Arabs to quote unquote worship at meteorites. They would actually enshrine meteorites in Kaabas. It was like a common thing. There were lots of Kaabas throughout, throughout pre-Islamic Arabia. Also, you're absolutely right. Like, I know for the ancient Greeks, for example, having a shrine and like having a statue in the shrine was to kind of ground the god into the holy space. The fucking statue, the bloody statue, isn't the god itself. It's meant to just sort of bring the presence of the god into the space. It's like a conduit. So yeah, it really irritates me when bloody monotheists, especially Christians and Muslims, just generalize and strawman polytheism, or when they confuse, like that Ramio 1993's video where he conflates Hinduism with pre-Islamic Arabian Semitic polytheism as like they literally have no connection. But they both have multiple gods. So hey, it's all polytheism. This kind of generalization just irritates me. Anyway.
Rash has his hand up, but really quick, the person who asked me that question also asked me this, and this answer will be a bit shorter, I think. He says, I have another different question. He says, we know that whatever Muhammad said was only written down, several hundred years later. Since this seems to be the consensus, how can we ever know if this is if Muhammad really said any of this, since this is all from hearsay? The answer is we can't. Rationalizer, go for it.
I just thought we were talking about the the general knowledge of the people at the time. Now, if you take into account that the Greeks were travelling throughout Arabia down through to Egypt, trading medical supplies with people as far as India, many years before Muhammad was even born. Galen's something like 13 volumes of Galen's work were available at the Library of Alexandria, something like 50 years before Muhammad was born. And they'd not only been transferred phonetically into Arabic, probably using the Syriac alphabet, they had also been summarized in order to make them easier to commit to memory. And when you look at these Quran verses 23:13 up to 14, the Quran says, then we placed him as a drop in a safe lodging. In Galen's On Semen, volume 5, part 3, on page 93, it says the first stage in which is seen in both abortions and dissections, the form of the semen prevails. So Quran saying at first it's a drop, Galen is saying at first it's a drop of semen. Quran says then we fashioned it a clot. Galen goes on to say then it is filled with blood. Quran says then we fashioned the clot a little lump. Galen goes on to say liver are still unarticulated and unshaped but have a certain solidity, so that's a little lump, an unformed clump. And then Quran 23:13, it says, then we clothe the bones with flesh. And so far, all of this from Galen has been in the same paragraph on page 93. And then on page 101, he says, then it articulates the organs precisely and brings all the parts to completion. Thus, it caused flesh to grow on and around the bones. I mean, we're talking literally step by step everything that Galen said, and Galen was wrong.
Okay, so I hope we didn't get too off topic for too. Well, I mean, Rash brought it back to embryology, of course, but let's move on to some more points on your paper, Captain.
Yeah. Okay. And let me just continue. Just one point on what Rash said. If you actually go to my paper, which by the way can be found at embryologyofthequran.blogspot.com, it has all the information you need. And if you look at my paper towards the end, there's a section in which I list every single embryological idea, whether it be in the Quran or the Hadith, and then I show either the same or a very similar idea, either from the Greek sources or from the Jewish sources. So I could actually offer a challenge to any of the Muslims to provide a single embryological idea that was not already known, and I really doubt anyone's gonna bring up anything for that. So you could check that out. And other than that, there's also a hadith in which Muhammad is asked a question regarding reproductive health, and the answer he gives is, let me actually quote it.
While you're looking for that, because I know it can take a while to rummage through. It certainly takes me a while to rummage through my notes and find a particular quote.
I should have it.
Okay,
here.
Go ahead.
Yeah, okay. So Muhammad was asked a question about whether it's okay to have sex with a woman who is suckling, breastfeeding, breastfeeding. And the answer Muhammad gave was he was about to prohibit that, but then he considered that the Romans and Persians did it, and they were okay. If you want the reference, this is Sahih Muslim, Book 8, Hadith 3392. Again, it's found in my paper as well. So, Muhammad didn't even have any problem, acknowledging the fact that he did have information about, what the Romans and the Persians did. He didn't seem offended like modern Muslims are, but acknowledging what the other cultures, knew and what they did, et cetera, et cetera. So, it's kind of pointless to say anything about, Muhammad not knowing any of these details.
By the way,
so coming off Muhammad, to take it back to Hamza's paper specifically, have you got any comments on the methodology that Hamza has used? Or if he's had to turn a blind eye to certain facts or anything along those lines, I'd be quite interested in what your opinion is on that.
Do you mean with regards to history or with embryology?
In regards to seeing something, thinking, that proves me wrong, I'll just ignore that and find something else, whether it's history, embryology, whatever you like. If there's anything that springs to mind, then that, because I'd like to discuss more the IERA paper specifically, because that's what you've written about. You've written about Hamza's claims, basically. So I think it might be interesting for you to give some kind of an opinion as to the processes that he used and so on.
Why don't you start at the beginning? Because I remember that you said something that the beginning of the whole text is where he showed a lack of knowledge was when he spoke about the clay. So if we start at the top and start with the clay in the beginning of the whole process, is that something where he shows that he knows the Quran and he knows what he's talking about when it comes to embryology and mixing that up with the Quran?
Okay, so I'll start from the beginning. So what Hamza has claimed to do is that he says he performed something called lexical analysis on eight different phrases in the Quran. Some of them are just words. So, he gets 8 stages at the end. And he says, after you perform a lexical analysis, you get all kinds of meanings that would not be evident if you were just reading it, So his first stage is something called, actually before that, and what he claims to have done is, what he means by lexical analysis is that he looks at each word in the Arabic, and he looks at what classical and academic dictionaries have defined those words. And then he says those meanings correspond to whatever he finds in modern embryology. And that is something that I want everyone to keep in mind, that he claimed to have used the academic and classical dictionaries to define the words. The funny thing, of course, is that when you actually look through the definitions he gives, there are like very few that are actually found in any of the dictionaries he actually, sources or references to. Very, very few. Actually, I can only remember one off the top of my head, and that was something completely insignificant. So most of the definitions are not where he claims they are. So
just want to confirm that he's quoting people or sources and saying this is what they say, but then if you go to that source, they're not saying it at all.
Yeah, I can speak to that myself because when he first came out with those claims and he was citing Lane's Arabic and also the Lisan al-Arab, I looked up in those, and in many cases it either didn't say what he wanted to say, or sometimes there was no entry at all for the word that he was saying he found in these sources. So, I mean, especially Lane's. Lane's is not very comprehensive. The Lisan is. The Lisan is very detailed, but Lane's is a much shorter book, and sometimes he would say he got it from these two sources, and some of the words, there wouldn't even be an entry for that particular word in Lane's lexicon, which would seem to indicate that there's never any real controversy around it.
I mean, this isn't even quote mining. This is quote invention. Quote mine, you can take what someone didn't mean, cut out a little bit in the middle and pretend they meant the opposite of what they were saying. But when you're citing things that aren't there at all, that's not quote mining, that's just outright lying.
I think the way he could get off the hook is to say, okay, I used these two sources, but I should have mentioned some of them are only in Lisan. I mean, that would be how he could get himself off the hook. But yeah, I think he just got lazy, to be perfectly honest, and or delegated his research to someone else who was not very responsible. Because does he really think that all the people in his corner that no one's going to know better or nobody's going to look it up?
What's happened is even funnier because most of the other lexical analysis definitions he provides are things that has been on the internet on Islamic apologetic websites for a very, very long time. So, they themselves say that, this is from Lisan al-Arab, blah, 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 but they're not actually there. So I think, for most part, Hamza is just copy whatever is on Islamic apologetic websites. And let me just get into specifics then. Maybe that will help.
Yeah, so, I will, if that's the case, I will give him a little bit of room to breathe, because if it's not a deception of his own crafting, I mean, it's still very irresponsible. But I do think there is a different. We encounter religious people who regurgitate arguments that they don't fully understand or haven't researched, and I try not to be as hard on them because they're not deliberately trying to deceive me. They're on the receiving end. So even someone who's relatively at the top of the apologist food chain, if they didn't make the argument up, I'll still say that it's not as bad as if he had known better. But of course, we don't know. We don't know what he knows. Klingschor, you had a comment.
Oh yeah, I just wanted to strike an analogy. There are a couple of Copernicus's. I think this is an analogy to show that it's kind of extremely likely that Hamza just blindly copied the mistakes of others and didn't even do any proper research. Let's strike an analogy with science and history. There was a famous Muslim astronomer. Can't remember if it was Ibn Ashatir or if it was Atusi, but he copied from both. It doesn't matter. Who made did some astronomical calculations and drew some diagrams. And mysteriously, Copernicus has diagrams that are identical. But the thing is that in the Arabic diagram, there is a mistake in one of the letters, and Copernicus repeats the exact same spelling mistake. Same Arabic spelling mistake, which proves that Copernicus was actually copying. Copernicus didn't copy his theories or anything, but it shows that he in the case of these diagrams, he just plagiarized them. the mistake is particularly the tell. So when we've got Islamic apologetic website, for example, answerinchristianity.org or whatever, saying that the Lisan Arab says that nutfa means this definition, and then Hamza Tzortzis repeats this claim saying that nutfa means this definition, even though Lisan Arab doesn't, it shows that Hamza has just plagiarized without even looking into it properly. As evidenced by the repeat the exact same mistake, which if he actually had of looked in Lisan Arab, he would not have made that mistake.
You're saying Hamza Tzortzis is just like Copernicus?
No, I'm saying that Hamza Tzortzis didn't do proper research and simply plagiarized a lot of his arguments from websites.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's funny. When you debate religion or philosophy online, and you get used to all the different arguments and tactics that are used, then you make the mistake of arguing with someone in real life. I have a lot of religious acquaintances, and when you argue with a believer in real life, they are often so uninitiated in the debate. I think I've said this before. You start to feel like a bit of a bully, or at least I do.
Yes. Oh my goodness, you're right.
It's just so easy. You see everything coming from a mile away, and you have to be a lot more gentle because they're not used to it, and it might be the first. They might be so entrenched in a community of believers that it's the first time that they're ever showed up. And I think that explains a lot of the antipathy that they have towards people who don't believe their religion or people who are irreligious, is the way that they can sort of be so easily humiliated by a non-believer if that non-believer has experience in debating this kind of thing. But I do think that we should, for example, when you argue with sort of a rank-and-file religious person, you hear a lot of the same bad arguments that the Hamzas or the Craigs or people like that will come up with. But I don't think we have to be very careful about who we accuse of outright dishonesty. If it's not an argument of their origin, they certainly are being irresponsible. But like I said, if they didn't come up with it, or I guess the middle ground would be someone like Nadir Ahmed, who it seems like he does. Well, I mean, I've heard some of his arguments from other sources before, but it seems like he does think these things up. But in his mind, I don't think there's any real dishonesty. He seems to be convinced himself of his own arguments, despite what we see as their utter lack of merit. But then, of course, there are people who are just really at the apex of deceit and dishonesty. For example, if you know, what is it?
Zakir Naik.
Yeah. I mean, that guy is clearly the engine of his own argumentation. He has his own little workshop where he makes up things like the ostrich egg argument and things like that are clearly nonsense, and he should know it if he's as knowledgeable as he says he is. Then you have that other guy. What is that guy? He's this kind of really, really scrawny white guy. His name is also Hamza, or is it Hamza Yusuf?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, Hamza Yusuf. Now that guy, if you've heard him speak in English and Arabic, you know that he's fully bilingual and his Arabic is very good. So when he says that the word in the infamous wife-beating verse really means, it doesn't mean beat her, it means assume an arrogant posture. Well, he's too knowledgeable. He is just lying through his teeth. Whereas
I've actually heard him say that the word is also used in the phrase to walk away from someone because it means to beat the ground as you walk.
Yeah.
And I think, well, that's still your feet banging on the ground. If you said to me, well, what I want you to do is something resembling your feet banging on the ground, I want you to do that to your wife's face. I think, no, you're asking me for domestic abuse. It's obvious.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is, in his case, his Arabic is too good. He knows that that's a lie. There's no mistake. But if someone else comes to you with that argument and you know right off the bat you've gotten it from him, you need to be a little bit more diplomatic in how you break the news to them that someone that they trusted and maybe look up to, unfortunately, is just a liar. And it creates this chain of bad argumentation. I mean, how many times have you gotten in an argument with someone theistic and they come at you with this kind of Cartesian solipsism? It's like, well, okay, how do we know that our senses are reliable? Maybe they're not. And then you just destroy them, and then they have nothing because they're regurgitating an argument that they didn't fully understand in the first place. The other guy is Aslan, who has a PhD and comes on public television and says, oh, well, the Quran has many verses that say that women are equal. As a matter of fact, that's the whole message of the Quran is men and women are equal. Makes no mention of any of the verses that clearly torpedo that whole characterization. I mean, that's not a difference of interpretation or how they would characterize it. I mean, that's just a bald-faced lie, and since he has a PhD in the shit, he should know. There's no way that that's an honest mistake or a misunderstanding that's been passed to him by someone else. He's just lying, pure and simple. Okay, so
the anomalous argument that always makes me cringe is the one where believers try to justify something that is clearly immoral, like in the Bible where all the children's heads are smashed on rocks and things like this. And it's always, well, you know, we get our morality from God. We don't understand it. Only God is the source of morality, so it's good in a way that we don't understand. That's right, okay. Is God a liar? No. Why isn't he a liar? Well, because that's immoral. How do you know? Maybe lying is completely moral because God decided it was, and God's lying to you. You have absolutely no way of knowing. If you say we've got no morals, then we've got no morals, and you've got to accept that the Bible could be lying to us because lying is moral. Shall we go back to Captain for a bit?
You haven't said anything. Do you have any comment? I know the hand program that Rash wrote is supposed to tell me who wants to talk and when, but yeah, I haven't been paying attention, so I'm just checking in on you. Okay, well, we'll go back to Captain.
So, the last thing I said was Hamza claims to have looked up the definitions in the classical and academic dictionaries, and in most cases, they're not actually there. So I'm going to get into specifics. The classical dictionary that he claims to use is called Lisan al-Arab. It's from 14th century, and that's like a very well-reputed book because what it has done is it has taken information from like 1,000 years of poetry and all the books and everything. It has basically a definition for every single way a word can be used. So it's really big, and it's well known. And the other one is called Lane's Lexicon, which is from the 19th century. So these are the two books that Hamza mostly relies on, or claims to rely on, but as we will see, that's not really always the case. So according to Hamza, there are 8 stages of embryology mentioned in the Quran. He starts with chapter 23, verse 12, which says, in the Arabic, it says, وَلَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ مِنْ سُلَالَةٍ مِنْ طِينٍ. And the translation is, and certainly we created man from an extract of clay. For some reason, Hamza thinks this is embryological in nature. To me, this is obviously talking about Adam and how, he was created from clay, etc., etc. But listen to his claim, because it's kind of funny. He says that the word, because it says man was created from an extract of clay, he says this is actually referring to the chemical elements found in clay. Why does he say this? Because Quran uses the word extract. And, when you say extract of X, it means all the things that make up X, or the chemical elements in X. That's the definition he gives. And this is apparently based on Lane's lexicon. But if you go into Lane's lexicon, here's how it defines the word extract, which in Arabic is sulala. It says an extract of a thing is the clear or pure part, or the most excellent part of that thing. Which, makes which makes more sense in the daily usage of the word extract. When we say extract of iron, we're not talking about chemical elements in the iron. We're talking about the iron itself. Extract of honey, we're talking about the honey itself. even the word, even the phrase "extract of clay" is pretty common. It refers to clay itself. But according to Hamza, it's referring to the chemical elements that make up clay. But really, just that's not actually found in any of the academic dictionaries. So that's one example of where he claims that something is found in the dictionary, but it's not actually there. But I just want you to think about what the scientific consequence of his logic is. If you're allowed to define extract as the chemical elements making up something, you could say anything is the extract of anything else.
So someone in the chat posted that clay is commonly composed of aluminum silicate, and aluminum and silicon are two elements that are conspicuous that they're not used in most life processes. Whereas, the fact of the matter is, you could go on a walk through nature, scoop up dirt, and organic chemistry, if anyone's loosely familiar with it, a lot of the stuff that's in that dirt in your hand is also in you, and also in all the animals. You go to find some chalk near some cliffs. A lot of the calcium in that chalk you also have. You can just go around, find rocks and inanimate things, and the common elements are common. But he managed to pick a substance, ironically, that had two common substances that don't function in any necessary way for life. I mean, it's not like he could have picked sodium, potassium, carbon, anything. He could have picked all these vital functions. He managed it's like I read a book recently. This guy, he says, "Doctor, I may have to commit suicide after I sign this embarrassing treaty because this general, he's a colonel actually. He says my men might feel that they betrayed him. After this, I'm going to kill myself. I want you to paint a little point on my chest exactly where my heart is." And the doctor doesn't want him to do it, so he paints a point where he can put a pistol right to his chest, fire it, and the bullet passes through without touching any vital organs. Now, of course, that's impossible, but that's just what it made me think of. He managed to try to shoot himself in the chest and not hit any vital organs because those are two elements that just aren't necessary. I mean, it really is. It's amazing. He defied all odds. You could have blindfolded yourself and taken a dart and thrown it at a picture of the periodic table and hit an element that was necessary for life, and he threw two of them and didn't. Rationalizer, go for it.
I was just going to say, it's just as easy to say that we're made from an extract of squirrel. And, that would be just so much more accurate than clay, because we do share a hell of a lot more in common with squirrels than we do with the usual consistency of clay. So, that would have been a vast improvement, I think. It would have interested me if I opened it at first. We made you from an extract of squirrel. I'd have thought, oh, this is going to be fun.
Right, and the example I given, or the example I wanted to give, but then I took it out because I thought it would be offensive, was, if Hamza's definition is considered valid, he would have to agree with the following statement: Muhammad is made from an extract of pigs and wine. He would have to agree with it.
I don't know if you intend to do it, but I really think you should. I think that you should quote the phrase that you've got from Prophet Shakespeare, sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
I'm going to bring in or do you want to read that quote before I bring in our first guest?
I'm not really sure. Are you talking about the example I give, or?
Yeah, the Prophet Shakespeare, where he mentions time dilation.
Okay, yeah, I mean,
how could Prophet Shakespeare have known this?
Okay, this is from the introduction of my paper, where I kind of give an example of what Hamza means by lexical analysis by doing it on a phrase from Shakespeare, and the sentence from Shakespeare is, "What seest thou else in the dark, backward, and abyssum of time?" Now, I list all the definitions found in the Oxford English Dictionary for dark, backward, and abyssum. And for example, let me see. The word backward can mean slow. I compare that to the fact that near a black hole, time is gonna slow down. There's a reference to time slowing down, so clearly this is referring to time dilation and not So, I mean, that's the kind of that's kind of what Hamza does. I just give that as an example of what you can expect Hamza to do.
Okay, I'm going to bring in our first guest. This is Charles Williams, and he has a question about Greek influence on the Arab world. Charles, are you with us?
Yes, I am.
Thank you for joining us. Go ahead, ask your question. That's a good one.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, I'm with it. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. We can see you.
Mute your blog TV. Mute your blog TV on the website, otherwise you'll get audio feedback that will confuse you.
Yeah. Should I go ahead and ask my question?
Yes, please.
Well, I kind of wanted to preface my question with, I'd been following the whole embryology thing with P.Z. Myers and that, I would say, debate that occurred at the stairs outside of some building in England. And I remember him, Hamza, trying to defend the embryology as being a revelation because Muhammad was supposed to have been completely ignorant, and he came from a backward place where people were illiterate. And it always occurred to me that there may have been a lot more knowledge in the region at the time because the Nabateans had been going through that area in trade routes for centuries.
Before you carry on, click on your
And so the Nabateans were also a very Hellenistic culture because they'd been
just before you carry on, click on your web browser, and at the bottom of the browser on Blog TV there's a speaker. If you click that and mute it, then you won't hear yourself talking back in a loop. Well,
He's muted himself by mistake.
no, you've muted your mic on Skype. Unmute your mic on Skype. Just for now, just close your browser or something like that.
Oh, close your browser. Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
That'll be easier. For now, just close your browser. Something like that.
There. Okay. This is my first time on Blog TV.
That's fine.
And it was very confusing hearing myself, so thanks. Hello?
Yes, we can still hear you. Anyway, so now, Klingschor, how much would you know about it? The Nabateans, they were, if I'm thinking of the right group, they were based in what is now Yemen?
They were up in Jordan, I think.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they were in Jordan and all the way down into Madain Sulla.
Okay, I'm thinking of the Sabaeans. I had those two confused, I think.
The Nabateans were in Jordan, and there was also a very powerful Hellenistic or Greek culture in other cities like Jerash and Philadelphia, which is now modern-day Amman.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was a lot of Greek influence at the time, well, maybe before Muhammad's time. And so that the knowledge of the Greeks, including people like Aristotle and Galen, would probably have been prevalent in that area. As I understand, didn't Muhammad even make a trip to Damascus at one time with his uncle Abu?
According to tradition, yes, he did travel up there on at least one recorded occasion with I think his uncle's caravans, and they don't say how many trips he made, but this was how the city-dwelling Hijazi Arabs made their living. It was their primary industry, was trading up and down the highway between the Semitic peoples living in the Levant or in Egypt, and that selling them stuff that they had bought from the southern Arabs who had shipping going all the way to India and China. So I think that far from being Hamza's argument seems to be akin to saying that the Hijaz was in this cultural glass jar, but in reality, I think that people there probably traveled more than most people at the sort of serf or peasant level of class of society did worldwide. They would have known more about surrounding cultures or even distant cultures as far away as India and China than most people would. I mean, your average, the world was a much bigger place because travel was so much more difficult back then. But like I said, the Hijazi Arabs, they had they were a rope strung between two very different parts of the world. So it's really quite the opposite of how Hamza tries to portray it. But Captain, you wanted to respond?
Yeah, I actually give a quote in my paper from a historian named Irfan Shahid, and if you remember the dialogue that Adnan had with P.C. Myers, he states, Irfan Shahid is like the best authority there is on pre-Islamic Arabia, and this is a quote from his book. He says, he states, the Arabs had 11 centuries or so of cultural relations with Rome on the Tiber and Rome on the Bosphorus, and even a longer period of relations with Hellenism, whether directly through the Macedonians or through the mediation of Rome. We're talking about 11 centuries of trade relations, so how you get from there to say, they had absolutely no transfer of any kind of knowledge, it's upon them to show that why, such a condition would exist anywhere.
Yeah, I think that's something that kind of needs to be emphasized, is that Muhammad himself was not an illiterate idiot that they're trying to make him out to be, like he was in a vacuum and he had no knowledge of the world and suddenly he had all this knowledge. I think it's very interesting, what was the intent for him to put the knowledge that he had or that he had been subject to into the Quran? What was his reason for putting it in there? Of course, he wanted to make it seem like it was more a broad scope, almost like an encyclopedia of knowledge that was given to him, by a higher authority, being Allah, of course. So he probably had an intent for putting it in there, but it's clear that it has the same, the same scientific errors that the Galen and Aristotle had. And Galen and Aristotle, Aristotle, he got into vivisection and he got into dissection, and so it's clear where he could have gotten the knowledge by direct observation without a microscope. And so this knowledge would have kind of slowly transferred through the Hellenistic world, through the schools and everything else. And I just think that there had to have been exposure for the people, even in the Arabian Peninsula, to that knowledge. There were a lot of Arab cultures that had become very, very Hellenized, including in the Saudi Peninsula. If you look at the Nabatean architecture in Madain Salah, which is a stone's throw from Medina, you can see in the architecture, the entablatures, the pilasters, the phrases, cornices, all modeled after Greek architectural styles. So it just makes sense to me that there was, there was knowledge from other cultures within those societies, and that Muhammad was aware of some of the science and some of the things that were part of the academia, and he wanted to incorporate that into the Quran to make it seem more knowledgeable and more more from a higher authority.
Oh, what was the name of that site you mentioned?
Oh, Madain Salah.
Yeah, well, if you are going to take a trip to that place, you better do it soon, because the Saudi government is tearing down historical sites like they're selling hotcakes. It's really quite a shame. Rationalizer, you had something?
Yeah, the issue of well, first of all, equating someone who's illiterate to someone who's stupid is really quite offensive. I'm sure there's plenty of illiterate people in the world. The primary transferal method of information for these Arabs was oral anyway, so he was just as able as anyone else to learn. Galen's work was the de facto standard medical encyclopedia for almost the entire world for well over 1,000 years. This is the kind of influence that Galen had on the entire world. It was absolutely amazing. So to say that people in that region didn't have any access to Galen's work, even though we knew it was already translated, written down and abbreviated for memorization, it is absolutely ridiculous. And then on the one hand, to claim that Mecca's out in the middle of nowhere, nobody could ever go there and tell anyone anything. But at the same time, say it was a busy trading port, and Muhammad was a trader, and the bit in the Quran that says that they walk past the ruins of Lot on a daily basis, even though it's over 1,000 kilometers away. This isn't an error because those Arabs used to travel a lot. So on the one hand, the Quran's not wrong because the Arabs travelled all over the place. And then on the other hand, Muhammad, who himself was a trader, couldn't have known anything because he lived out in the middle of nowhere and never went anywhere.
Yeah. Well, it seems to me also that Khadija, when she married Muhammad, was looking for somebody who was an intelligent person. She owned caravans, as I recall. And she was probably looking for somebody who could help her manage her caravans. And Muhammad seemed like an honest, decent person or something. I don't know. She found something in Muhammad that she was interested in.
I think you have a point in that, if you're a captain at port and you need replacement people, you want experienced sailors as opposed to people who are green. So he probably must have known what he was doing, or she just took a fancy to him. But it makes sense if unless they're, like I said, unless she just took an eye, had an eye for him and just it was just love at first sight. And then as far as his employer relationship with her, it makes sense that if she's going to bring him on in any kind of a leadership capacity, he must have had experience with these same said caravans going up into Syria, Palestine. Captain, you had a comment?
Yeah, I just want to make one point, and I think after that we should get back to discussing the specifics of embryology. But the point I want to make is that of course we all agree that it's kind of pointless to say that Mecca or Muhammad lived in a bubble, and he had absolutely no knowledge of Hellenic biology and whatever. But other than that, for me, this whole discussion of Galen, Aristotle, etc. It's a red herring from the Muslims. If you see my paper, I only talk about the Galen Aristotle thing maybe in like 10, 15 pages. Everything else is purely discussing what's written in the Quran and what Hamza's claims are. I could even give you, even if Galen and Aristotle never even existed, there's absolutely nothing in the Quran or the Hadith, that could not be, derived from direct observation or extrapolations based on observation. So, to me, Muslims, keep talking about Muslim apologists keep talking about Galen and Aristotle. It's a bit of a red herring just to, make us furious and, not look at what the Quran actually says.
Klingschor?
I actually must leave early, I'm afraid. I'm very sorry. Unforeseen circumstances. But I just wanted to say, the hadith mentioned before, wherein Muhammad mentions the Al-Rumani, the Romans. I just thought to point out that by Muhammad's time, Romans actually meant Greeks. All the Romans were actually Balkan and Anatolian Greeks. The language of the Roman Empire was Greek. Just even more reason to think that Muhammad actually had access to Hellenic knowledge. And the idea that he couldn't read is one of the most ridiculous things I've ever heard. Given that he was a merchant, he would have had to have some basic knowledge of language. I
don't know. You'd think so, but at the same time, there were a lot. There were illiterate merchants in their day who just used tally systems or had some one scribe. That was typically the norm. It seems is you have, on a ship you typically have one guy who really knows his way around the maps and the navigation equipment. I think they might have one literate person, but as long as you can count, you're okay.
I'm skeptical. I think that the whole idea that he couldn't read is more of a polemical device developed by later Muslims to sort of make it seem more remarkable that someone living in an outer region could have come up with this.
Yeah,
I agree.
Anyway,
I would agree with you that it's suspicious because he was supposed to have come from a well-respected family. But then look at how even many members of noble houses in Europe during the Dark Ages were illiterate. It's kind of hard for us to imagine. I agree, but it could have still been the case. We don't really know.
I want to say just one last thing before I go to Captain Disguise. I do realize it is sort of a red herring, but I also think it's interesting to try to find the sources of information that are in the Quran. I think there's a thread there. that has been totally misconstrued by people like Hamza, and I think it's more interesting to me anyway to find out, well, what were the influences for Muhammad to incorporate that? Because it's obvious that this is not real embryology. I can open up a 7th grade embryology book and find more science of embryology, and all those scientists who contributed to that, they're not all prophets. But I think that people like Hamza are doing a lot of damage by presenting it this way, as though it is some sort of miraculous science that has been incorporated. It's not healthy for Islam, that's for sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Klingschor, if you have to excuse yourself, thank you for your contribution. We always appreciate it. And Stopspamming has a comment before we go back to Captain Disguise.
I've actually got a question, Charles. Given that we have all made videos on embryology, refuting the contents regarding embryology, and now what Captain Disguise is doing, he's taking the stance of looking at the textual contents and environment and refuting that as well. What do you think, after Hamza has made such an idiot of himself in Ireland, and after all the videos that we have made refuting him, what do you think is the appeal of Hamza to Muslims? Why do they still cling to him?
Well, it's a reinforcement to them. They need that constant string of reinforcing that what their Quran is miraculous, and they're so strongly geared towards their delusion. Their mind is so set in delusion that they hear what he says, and it's almost like a child seeing a cardboard box with plastic toys, and that child sees that as treasure. He sees that as gold, and he's a pirate. It works with their imagination. That this illiterate comes out of the desert not knowing anything, and God comes and speaks to them. But in reality, Muhammad spent a lifetime gathering knowledge and information and putting it into a system that actually appealed to probably the ignorant people who were around him at the time. And he was probably more traveled than most of the Medina or the Hijaz. And he understood the people that he was around, and he was able to manipulate them through their spirituality and their ignorance. And Hamza is doing just as well today by carrying that message forward and using that excerpt, saying that, look, it's a miracle that he came up with this. Well, Muhammad was also trying to make it look like it was a miracle when he incorporated it in his message. So it's almost like Hamza is probably using a similar technique or methodology that Muhammad used, a psychological one, to manipulate the people who were geared to that type of thinking.
Yeah, exactly. But now, Captain, you are using now the approach that Hamza is using, also the lexical analysis. Do you think that this is going to have an effect or any kind of impact on Muslims looking up to Hamza to give them comfort?
Well, my challenge to Muslims are, if they think Hamza is right, refute me. I challenge you.
Really quick, someone asked about Tom Holland's documentary, and I thought this was a good place to plug in a comment about that, because we were talking earlier about how much of Hamza's argument about embryology relies on the whole Hijaz in a jar theory, that it was isolated and that it couldn't that Hellenistic or Persian learning couldn't percolate down there, and I think that it sounds like we're in agreement that that's in fact could have. But as far as Tom Holland's documentary is concerned, I did watch it. I managed to acquire it, even though it's blocked here. It was interesting, but I actually have the same problem with the way he connected the dots that I have with Hamza's ideas, because what Tom Holland is saying is that he doubts that that Islam, as it came to be known from sort of the Quran itself and the first round of hadiths and the original the first generation of texts that emerged after the Quran, he doubts that those were really fully formed or close to it, or that the religion really started in the Arabian Peninsula. He says that it may have originated after the conquest of the Byzantine and Persian territories as a sort of mortar to keep the bricks of that new empire together. And I disagree with we can talk about the reaction that he got and that Channel 4 got later, but I disagree with the way he connects the dots, because he is, from my view, engaging in the same fallacy that Hamza is, and that is he's arguing from his own personal disbelief that the Judeo-Christian traditions could have percolated down into the area. And it's a shame that Kling left, because I'm sure he would have a lot to say about this. This is a subject he's studied a lot about, how much the Jewish and Christian communities, Jewish communities in Arabia, and also Christian Arabs, how much influence they had in the area, how many communities there really were, and how ripe the opportunity was for someone creating a new religion to draw on aspects of those religious traditions. But Captain, you have your hand up?
Oh, can I ask a question?
We'll let Captain go, and then we'll come to you, Charles.
Okay.
Well, actually, he can ask this question. That's fine.
Okay, go ahead, Charles.
No, I personally think that is maybe not such a good approach to make the assumption that maybe Muhammad didn't really exist or the way it was. It just seems to me more likely that it did, because you had the Ridda Wars to unite the Arabian Peninsula, to develop the armies that marched out at Yarmouk. You had to have reasonable unity in the Arabian Peninsula at the time for the Battle of Yarmouk, which was critical. That was really the pivotal battle that caused the Muslims to flow out of the Arabian Peninsula and into the Levant there. And I would argue that that there was a Muhammad, there was an Abu Bakr, and there were the original caliphs that united the armies and the tribes of the Arabian Peninsula, and that probably the concept of Allah was very appealing to bring the people together, and it was also very appealing to the young warrior who wanted the loot and booty after having a victory, because he was inspired by the rewards of winning the battle and the cause of Allah, because they fought tenaciously against a professional army, and they defeated them, and I think that there was a lot of spiritual impetus to do that, and I think it came from the thread from Muhammad to Abu Bakr to the later. I think Omar was the third. I don't remember. I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I got you. I mean, it's peculiar how in other instances where you have, for example, the Mongolians and the Turks, when they conquered a lot of the same real estate or other territories, they tended to blend in with the native population. I mean, the Turks held on to a single state under Turkish sovereignty, but I think the Mongolians especially had a very transient conquest, because the cultures that they were dominating had such a powerful influence. Wherever they invaded a Christian area, they converted to Christianity. Where they invaded Muslim territories, they converted to Islam. When they conquered Buddhists, they converted to Buddhism, and so forth and so on, because they didn't have this strong central idea of religion. A lot of people who wrote accounts of the Mongolians, people who were being conquered by them, said they couldn't tell you anything about the Mongolians' religion, because their folk beliefs were so thin on ritual and on any kind of art or literature that they produced. So, the fact that Islam survived contact with these other more sophisticated cultures after the conquest says that the people who were proposing it, or people who believed in it, that their conviction must have been pretty strong. Their sense of group identity, at least, must have been very powerful. Rationalizer.
I was just going to say the comment about them defeating these really professional armies. You've got to take into account that these two armies had been at each other's throats for a very long time. They'd been killing each other. Their forces was really depleted, and in addition to that, the bubonic plague was sweeping through the region at the time, and the Romans were suffering very heavily from it. And there are apparently accounts of people talking about how some of these Roman cities were like ghost towns, and that the vegetation was growing out from the ground, and you'd have goats grazing in the street and all kinds of things. They'd turned basically into these ghost towns, and these weren't. My impression that I've got, these people that they went and defeated, they weren't Romans and Persians at their strongest.
No.
They were Romans and Persians on their knees, crippled from trying to kill each other, whilst also fighting off the bubonic plague at the same time. So, I'm not going to put down what they did in achieving to beat them, but I do want to put it into perspective. They didn't go and fight the Romans' fiercest fighting machine at their peak. They went in when they were just about to die, and they finished them off.
Yeah, you see a similar dynamic with the Germanic peoples and later the Huns and the Western Roman Empire. There had to have been, those people most likely could not have beaten the Western Romans at the peak of their power, but nobody doubts that they were good warriors or that they were fierce and that they really wanted it. But especially when it came to a matter of laying siege to cities, it wasn't an easy matter for them to just break the back of Roman power when the Romans were unified. But constant plagues, economic crises, and a never-ending string of civil wars caused Western Roman power to evaporate, and then it was really just a matter of the Goths and Huns just going and pushing them over. And it may have been a similar situation with the Arabs and the two empires of the region. Okay, so anyway, so like I said, I don't know if anyone wants to expound more on the Channel 4 documentary, but basically, obviously, I believe that Holland and anyone else, ourselves included, we should, we have the right and have every motivation to look into these things and re-examine them. But in Holland's case, I don't actually agree with his interpretation of the evidence. I think that a lot of his argumentation is based on the same kind of argumentation that Hamza relies on. That's just personal disbelief and sort of rendering the Hijazi Arabs being more simple and more primitive than I think they actually were.
Well, if anybody wants the Holland video, the documentary, I've put it on my Vimeo account.
Oh, you know what? He was scheduled to come on, but then something came up and he wasn't able to come on. I don't know if he'll be able to reschedule, but that would be nice. I originally talked with Rationalizer. I said, okay, well, if Tom Holland does come on the show, I'm going to play a little prank on him. I'm going to say, joining us is author and historian Tom Holland. He wrote the Channel 4 documentary Innocence of Muslims. Thank you for joining us. Oh, wait, that's not right. I just checked my notes. Sorry. I would have loved to have seen him squirm. Okay, Captain, let's get back on topic with your embryology.
Yeah, I just want to make a point about the historical questions. Those are all very interesting historical questions. But the reason I don't want to discuss them in the context of the embryology miracle claim is because everything we said in the last half hour, this is how it's going to register in the mind of a Muslim. He's going to think that, all of us are arguing that Muhammad had detailed knowledge of what Galen wrote and what Aristotle wrote. And, that's the kind of straw man even Hamza repeats in his paper. To me, responding to them is not even worth it because of just how pathetic it is. So, to me, the whole historical discussion of, where all this knowledge came from is kind of a red herring that, Muslims just like to pull out because of how weak their actual claims are regarding the Quran.
Yeah, I got into a brief sparring session with Hamza and IERA supporter about this very issue, and Hamza's incredibly, his response to this is to say, well, if you're going to say that he got this information from other human beings who were in the area and who were knowledgeable, and it's demonstrated that he had every opportunity to talk to them, both on his trip to Syria and in the Hijaz itself, where people were traveling all the way, you have to prove concretely your claim, which is just astounding, because obviously you're going to say that it's more likely that an angel, a human being with glowing aura and a robe and wings coming out of its back like a dove, that is more likely. I mean, if I say, look, I got this soda at the corner store, well, maybe I did or maybe I didn't. Maybe I got it from someplace else. But given the fact that it has the logo and everything on it, and you're familiar with this, do you really think that a magical alligator from Mars gave it to me, or that I went and obtained it from some earthly, mundane avenue? I mean, I don't mean to be too insulting, but when someone says something like that, when someone says, "Well, I demand, Pixar, it didn't happen. You need to go back in time and videotape on your iPhone Muhammad having that particular conversation, because it could be that he knew someone who knew that information, but the topic just never came up in conversation. Ergo, he must have gotten it from an angel." If someone's standards of evidence are that inverted, it's like their brain is in backwards in their skull. It's remarkable that they could keep a straight face. I can't believe that anybody doesn't see the issues with that.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Like, his arguments for, regarding the question of plagiarism are absolutely pathetic, which is why I only spend like very little on it. And the funny thing is, one of the few original works that Hamza has actually done in this paper is something called the lexical analysis of what Galen and Aristotle wrote. And he wrote like 10 pages of that. And, I just needed like half a page to refute all of it because his underlying argument was just so pathetic.
Can you give us an example of this?
Yeah, okay. For example, here's what Hamza does. So he's responding to the accusation that Muhammad plagiarized, right? And here's what he says. Muhammad did not plagiarize from Galen or Aristotle, because what Galen and Aristotle wrote are different from what the Quran has. And for example, he would say that the word used in the Greek is spermatos, and then he would say, this does not correspond to what nutfa means. And he says, since it's not and then he says, there are better words to describe spermatos in Arabic, and since the best word was not used in the Quran to describe what the Galen and Aristotle said, therefore, he could not have plagiarized. So, the underlying argument is, whenever someone plagiarizes another person's work, they're always going to use the best words to describe, the original work. I mean, who comes up with that? So, an idiot with the worst word choice, with the worst vocabulary, could never be accused of plagiarism, because, he would always say something that's, does not reflect what the original work said. So, the argument are pathetic, which is why I spent very little time on it.
Well, what about his claim that he says that Muhammad only kept what was true and left out what was wrong?
Well, if they'd like to explain to me how a blood clot, a semen turning into a blood clot is accurate, I'd like to. And if they'd like to explain how, we are supposed to remain in the form of semen for a period of 40 days, I'd really like to, I'd really like them to, tell me about it.
Also, the claim that the fluid is from between backbone and ribs, which of course was the Romans and the Greeks used to argue, does semen come from the testicles or the kidney? I think Galen believed that in one case it would come from one place and that'd be a boy, and if it came from the other place it would be a girl. So there was a belief that semen came from kidneys, at least in some cases, and that's in there. a fluid ejected from between backbone and ribs. And of course, the Islamic apologist response is that it comes from between the man's backbone and the woman's ribs. And it's like, well, that is not a fluid. That's not a fluid. There isn't a fluid that develops between my back and my wife's ribs. That's not how it happens. It develops somewhere completely different that I just don't want to go into.
Yeah, I'll actually go into detail discussing that particular verse in my paper, and I'd like to mention just this one instance where we know for sure Hamza is being dishonest. Let me give you the example. So the verse we're talking about is 86:7, which says, خلق من ماء دافق يخرج من بين الصلب والترائب. So, the two keywords are sulb and tara'ib. And sulb, means backbone, which he doesn't really, well, he does, but, I refute that pretty well. But, the second word, tara'ib, he doesn't want to define it as ribs. So he defines it as the pelvic arch. Okay, so, he's referring to where the ovaries are going to be. So, he's got a very convenient definition, the pelvic arch. And in his reference, he lists a dictionary called Taj al-Arus, which is a 19th century Arabic lexicon. It's also pretty famous. But right next to it, he says, it is referenced in an English translation of English translation of the Quran authored by Muhammad Asad. Now, if you go to Muhammad Asad's translation, he translated the word tara'ib as pelvic arch, but in the footnote, he described that he made that up. He made that definition up. And then, well, his exact words are, the plural noun tara'ib, rendered by me as pelvic arch, has also the meaning of ribs. And that is what, then he gives the reference of Taj al-Arus for the definition of ribs, not for pelvic arch. But if you were just reading Hamza's paper, you get the impression that the dictionary defines tara'ib as pelvic arch, which it doesn't. So that's one case where for sure that he was being dishonest.
Okay, so if you go and look through all the words, what you've done now is you've taken his three keywords, which are nutfa and alaka and mugda, I think. How did you go and refute him on the ribs, or rather the bones being clothed with flesh?
Yeah, that was really annoying to refute. First of all, all that the verse is saying is that the bones are going to be wrapped in flesh. I mean, all you have to do is look at your, freaking arm, and you see, there is skin, there is flesh, and there is bone. I mean, there is nothing more to it. But then, he goes into basically misrepresenting a bunch of scientific texts to make the claim that the bones are formed first, and then the wrapping of the muscles happen. And, actually go into pretty detail. Like, it's going to be a lot to explain it right here. I actually give a lot of quotes from, various books, It doesn't happen that way. It happened exactly the way P.C. Myers explained it. They happen in parallel, obviously. You're never going to find a situation where, the bone or even precursors to bone are just standing there waiting to be wrapped in, whatever. That never happened.
And what about the claim that you hear so many times that, of course, the embryo looks exactly like a medicinal leech?
I'll make one concession that, in some ways it does look like a leech because it's a tube-shaped thing. But, the next thing I want to know is what's their evidence for the claim that word means leech-like thing. And what they're going to point to is the fact that the word alaka literally means leech, not leech-like thing, leech. So if you actually translated that sentence literally, you would be saying that semen is turned into a leech. You could argue with that if you want. But I actually argue that the most consistent definition for the word alaka is blood clot, and I give a couple of evidences for why that is. And also, you could look at like the works of scholars right from the first century of Islam to even today. I list like 25 different scholars and their works. They all define Alaka as a blood clot. Not a single instance where anyone said this is a leech or something that looks like a leech. So, it's all just reinterpretations. So, there's no reason for me to accept a leech-like definition where all the evidence points to a blood clot.
Rationalizer has a comment, and then I'm bringing in our next guest, DPR Jones, and I'm just going to leave. Well, you can stay or go, Charles. It's your call.
Oh, okay. I'll stay for a little while longer.
Okay.
I just wanted to point out as well that clinging to the uterus is another thing that Galen said. He said that the embryo.
Oh, by the way, sorry, can I make one point?
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, it's about the leash-like thing. I also show two statements from the Jewish Talmud, which predates the Quran and Muhammad, which describes, in the one statement, it describes an aborted fetus as a worm. So, we have this worm-like fetus even before the Quran. Also, there's another statement which says that the embryo clings in the womb, which actually, if you think about it, is a pretty intuitive idea, given that, when the baby comes out, it's clinging to the umbilical cord. So, yeah, go on. Sorry.
It was something that Galen had already said. He said the embryo clings to the wall of the uterus like an apple clings to the branch of a tree.
Mm-hmm.
So, once again, nothing new. If it doesn't mean blood clot and it does mean a thing that clings, then it was something Galen said. Say if it means blood clot, it was something that Galen said and got wrong. So it's either not a miracle or it's wrong. And for an omniscient being that could see into the future and see how crap I thought that embryology statement would be, it could have done a hell of a lot better. Me, with this many centuries of advance in scientific knowledge and still knowing very little about embryology, I could have done a far better job of explaining stuff without going into great detail, still being poetic, and even just making tiny adjustments to the Quranic text itself. So it was just that if it's an all-knowing being, it was yet another major failure.
Also, with the leech-like definition, if all that Allah actually wanted to tell us was that the embryo looks like a leech, by that which he means the embryo has a tube-shaped structure at a certain point, the word leech is a bit arbitrary. He could have, made some other, found some other worm to put it in there, but he chose the one word, which also has a biological meaning of a blood clot.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, what are the odds?
What was the most difficult thing, or was there anything that was difficult for you to refute on this one?
Okay, there was nothing difficult, but there were some things that, just had to do a lot of research. For example, that thing with the covering of the bones with the flesh. He pretty much misrepresented, two or three scientific texts. So, I had to go into a lot. Let me mention my partner, whose name is Martin Taverell. His blog is QuranSpotlight.wordpress.com. He's a good guy, check him out. So we too had to go to a lot of science textbooks and papers and, read a lot. So, that just had a lot of information, but at the end of the day, we were trying to explain a simple phrase that all it said was that bones are wrapped in flesh. And I even found a verse in the Bible that says the exact same thing.
Yeah, you also have the three darknesses, and you have a lot of similarities and parallels in other books.
So there was nothing hard to refute.
Okay,
all you had to do was check the sources and find out that he was lying about it, and rest was easy.
Okay, what surprised me is that he was so blatantly stupid in taking the sources that could be checked by anybody who had a cursory knowledge of Arabic. And you had this advantage that you could do that. And that is what I find funny, that he let himself into this. And they're still propagating this. Please, atheists, prove me wrong. Well, he's been proven wrong so many times. Please,
skeptics, come on my forum, prove me wrong, let me delete your comment and ban you. Okay, DPR Jones has joined us. Thank you. What do you have for us today?
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. First off, thank you all for participating in the charity event a couple of weekends ago. Very much appreciated. A couple of things before I go further than that, though. Charles, I think, mentioned the conversation between Hamza and PC Myers taking place on the steps of a building in Britain. It was actually in Dublin at the World Atheist Convention, and which I was fortunate enough to be present. I only say that because there are a lot of people in Ireland who would hate the idea that they were being tarnished with the label of being British. Also, again, a couple of things that have been mentioned. I totally agree with Charles's comments. I think it was Charles who, when asked, why do people still look up to Hamza? It's confirmation bias. They want to hear people say what they want to hear. Utterly agree with that point. And finally, before I move on to my point, Captain Disguise, great work on debunking Hamza, and the fact that you had to spend such a lot of time doing so reminds me of an expression I think I used in relation to someone from Fox News. It's very easy to shit on a carpet, but it takes a hell of a lot of time to clear up the mess. And this is what these people do. And Stopspamming was saying, well, why does he use all these references? What other references does he have to hand to use? No, he just uses them, spouts all the shit, and then people have to spend an awful lot of time clearing up the shit. Anyway, the point I wanted to raise is that on the BBC website today, an article has been posted. It relates to the anti-Islam YouTube film that has been posted, I think, since the 1st of July. And I'm sure you're all familiar with it. I'm sure you're all familiar with the response throughout the world
I personally think
as a result of
the
it.
next Citizen Kane.
Well, I think there's been an interesting development, and this is what I want to ask you about. Someone has posted a $100,000 reward for the person who kills the filmmaker. Now, that doesn't surprise me greatly. People of the Islamic faith have had a history of issuing fatwas in the past and having them carried through. What I think is different about this one is that it was issued personally by a government minister, the Minister for Railways, as it happens. And he's going to pay this out of his pocket personally if someone commits or murders the filmmaker.
What country?
Sorry?
What country?
Pakistan.
Okay. I'm just checking.
Yeah. I've twittered about it, and I'm just in the middle of writing a blog about it. Now, there are so many things I would like to discuss, but just let me throw it open in a general way. What are your views about not just an imam or someone who purports to be a leader of a certain group of religious people, an elected government minister offering money for murder? Now, I'm looking at the moment at the penal code in Pakistan. I think that he has committed a crime in Pakistan. I think that he's probably in breach of international law and conventions, although it's not my area of expertise. But even if he isn't, why on earth should we have any time or diplomatic relationships with a country that has a minister in its government that is prepared to do such things? At what stage do we say enough is enough? We cannot tolerate this intolerance anymore. That's my question.
I have a counter question. Do you have to be a Muslim to claim the $100,000 bounty? Because I could use some things around the house. Rationalizer, you had a serious comment.
Well, I can imagine if a British MP had made an offer to pay $100,000 to have a Pakistani citizen murdered for some crap film that he'd uploaded to YouTube, that guy would be kicked out on his ass so quickly. You know, the British government, I mean, you've got Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton paying for TV adverts in Pakistan saying, condemn this video, right? Now, that's what the politicians in America are doing. And then the politician in Pakistan has not been kicked out for offering 100 grand reward to kill someone in another country. The guy is the Minister for Railways. If he's got 100 grand to spare, he should spend it on making Pakistani trains go faster than people can walk, or maybe adding extra carriages so people don't have to sit on the roof.
Well, I want to say one thing too. It seems to me that would be the same as a declaration of war, because the makers of the film violated no laws of our freedom of expression. So there's no blasphemy here. There's no violation of freedom of expression. And for a foreign official to offer a reward, an official reward apparently, to kill an American citizen who's done no crime, that would be the same as a declaration of war. I don't want to say that we should declare war on Pakistan, but in my view, that would be a reason for it. And the second thing I wanted to say is, there's a lot of knee-jerk condemnation of the film, and I agree, it was really poorly done. But I think people need to look at the film and see what is the message in the film. Although I don't agree with most of it, I think that it is a plea from the Copts, because in the beginning of the film, you see a mob of Muslims attacking a Coptic shop, the soldiers standing aside doing nothing about it. And the guy who is giving a lecture I'm not saying, the film is good or anything, but I'm saying that there's points that are being made in the film that people should look at. The father is pointing out that man plus X equals terrorism, and then he says man plus X equals terrorist, and terrorist minus X equals man. And of course the X is Islam. So then it goes into the films about Muhammad, and it's a clear slander of Muhammad and who he was and what he represented. But there's two scenes in the film that I think are points that should be discussed, and one of them is Safiya and the murder of Kanana, where they show the scene of it, and the other one is the death of Kiffer. Oh wait, I'm not hearing. Are you hearing me?
Yes, I'm hearing you.
Oh, okay. Okay. The other one is the death of is her name Kiffer? At the end, it was a critic of Muhammad who was pulled apart by camels, and she was drawn and quartered, essentially. And it's in the Hadith. And so these stories I think a lot of them do come from the Hadith. I'm not sure what the references are. But Safiya was part of the Jewish tribe around Medina that was attacked by Muhammad, and he beheaded all the men who had reached the age of puberty. I'm sure that most of you guys are aware of this story, and then he killed her Safiya's father, and Muhammad himself took a liking to Safiya. And then he killed her husband Kanana by torturing him to death, and then beheading him as he was dying. So he married her that night, and I'm sure that she wasn't really in love or anything. I'm sure she was more in fear and shock in seeing all her tribesmen killed and everything. But the movie presents those. So it was a poorly done movie. The acting was bad. It was overdubbed. The scenes were done poorly, and I wonder if that was done on purpose so as not to indict the actors and actresses. But they were trying to make a point in the movie. And then the other thing that I thought was a fail in the movie was when the Jewish guy was trying to justify all the genocide in Jericho, as though it was somehow ordained by God, which to me is just as ugly as the killing of the Jews around Medina. I think that people can say it's a bad movie, but I think that people also need to say, well, is there a message there? Is somebody trying to speak out? Are the Coptics trying to say something about what's happening to them in a world now that's become extremely hostile towards them? And that's all. Yeah. In other words, I think that people need to look at the movie also and see what's being said.
Okay, Rationalizer, and then I think DPR had more.
My impression of it was, one, it was really shit. Two, there was some stuff in there that was clearly deliberately wrong, like calling him Muhammad, son of unknown, just so that they could call him bastard. And his name was Muhammad ibn Abdullah, so that they know he was the son of Abdullah. You know, putting that in, and then, you know, does Muhammad like having sex with men? Yes, he does, and stuff like this. You know, some stuff was thrown in just for the sake of insulting people and pissing them off, which, you know, it doesn't actually bother me, because nobody has the right to not be offended, especially if it's funny. And the thing is, though, is if they hadn't done that, I think they could have made a much better film, because the rest of it I was looking and thinking, well, this is accurate. This is in the hadiths. Yeah, this is in the hadiths. So if they'd done a film consisting of only those parts, and then you'd have had riots all around the world going, oh no, they've made this video, and then you'd say, yeah, but we only made a video showing what he actually did. So all your complaints were that Muhammad wasn't a nice person, and the worst that they could come up with then was, yeah, but you showed Muhammad on camera. You know, that's all they'd have. And wasn't it convenient that Sophia had her period just after the battle? Like, it just finished in a dad and a brother and a husband. She came out, first thing she did is, oh, hang on a minute, I'm just dropping my blob. Right, okay, yeah, we can have sex now according to Islamic law. Yeah, right, I believe that.
Yeah, I would agree that there was they were out to really, you know, slander Muhammad, and I think that detracted from the message, and so for that reason I agree with you absolutely. But I do think that there were some things in there.
DPR, you had a comment?
Yes, I was interested in Charles's observations about the film, because I've only seen about 2 minutes of the trailer, which you can see on YouTube, and I stopped because I just thought it was so poorly acted and directed. But I was just looking at an article. I was trying to read it as I speak. It seems as if this film was not done on a shoestring. It was done with about $5 million from what the report I'm reading from Jewish donors in the US to make the film. And also, and I can't find the bit that I was looking for, it seems to be the case that they did go out of their way to deliberately make it provocative. But I would utterly echo Rationalizer's comments when he said, my comment is, even if they did, so what? No one has the right not to be offended. But I have to say, bringing it back to my point, quickly, one more point. Good on YouTube. Anyone who's got a YouTube channel knows how easy it is to upset YouTube and get yourself banned or have videos removed. On this point, they are holding firm. They are not removing this video. So good on them. But we have moved off this point, my original question. What do we do about it? What do we do about the attacks on embassies, the murder of ambassadors, and threats and offering and encouraging, inciting murder by political officials in Pakistan? What do we do? What is the answer?
Well, there's no easy answer. You suggested before we cut off, or you asked, why do we keep up relations with Pakistan?
Well, not only keep up relationships with them, the US and the UK give enormous amounts of money to Pakistan.
Yeah.
Now, I know that those that are rebelling are perhaps representative of a small nipple on a large breast. The breast being Islam and the nipple being those that are protesting. But why should we continue relationships because that railway man, as I call him, he's not insignificant. His position as a publicly elected representative of his country is making this threat. Diplomatic relationships, in my opinion, should be cut off. Grants, aid, and everything like that should be cut off.
Captain, you had a comment?
Yeah, well, one thing we could do is try something like make a movie about Muhammad Day. if thousands of people did it, they're not really gonna kill each and every single one of them. So.
Wait, you suggest we trigger so many protests that they just burn themselves out?
No,
I think that's a very, very good suggestion.
They're gonna get used to it. I mean, they can't be. I mean, here's the thing. Like even in India, where I come from, Muslims and even the religious people have the attitude that respect each other's religion. So, they kind of don't mock each other. The people in that area, that's how they grew up. Nobody, blasphemes or disrespects anyone's religion. They just have to get used to it, I think.
Well, getting used to it means life-threatening.
I agree with Captain in this regard. If it's like if you have a fear of spiders, there are various ways in which you can cure that. You can do it gently, or you have the suddenly being thrown into a room full of spiders. The fear factor can only reach a certain level, and then it automatically, biologically, sociology, whatever, you know what I mean. It declines. In a similar way, if one of these videos was made every single day, the amount of offence that they could take automatically would decline. So I think the flooding of insults has got some merit behind it.
And maybe eventually they can make a serious movie about Muhammad, about his life. And I think that would be far more interesting.
With actually accurate research. I mean, that is the thing, is the production values being low. I don't know if 4 out of the 5 million that was raised just went up the nose of the director or what. But I mean, obviously the values were quite low. It was terrible. I mean, I don't know if there's no Hollywood big budget movies being played in theaters in parts of the Muslim world, but do they really think that those production values are consistent with what a mainstream film is, that they have I mean, I'm sure most of them haven't even taken a look at it, but it's just ridiculous to think that. I mean, nobody had ever heard of it before some Egyptian cleric
most
found
of them can't see it because the film, I said YouTube was wonderful in that it kept it on the internet, but it has banned it in a number of countries, including Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Libya. It's also been banned, although it's not clear who banned it, in Pakistan, India, and one other country that I can't remember. So most of these people have definitely not seen the film.
It is really. It's like a cross between Life of Brian and The Room by Tommy Wiseau. It's about a religious prophet, but it's just so bad. But it's so bad that I'll be saying lines from that short clip forever. Anytime somebody gets like pissy with me, I just turn to them and say, "Okay, you father of what is it? Okay, you bastard of unknown father." What does she say? That line is just so badly delivered. It's right up there with "You're my favorite customer" as he leaves the store in The Room. Anyway, Captain and then Rationalizer.
Yeah, I wanted to make a comment. If anyone wants to make something like an Islamic Life of Brian, I assure you're going to find a lot more comedy, a lot more violence, and a lot more sex. Islam. You can't go wrong with that.
Rationalizer?
Yeah, it's clear that a lot of these people haven't seen it, because I was on Facebook earlier, and there's a lot of Muslims on my list, and the amount of people that had reposted this picture, and it was of a building snapped in half and fallen to the ground, and it said, "This is a miracle from Allah. Today on the 19th, this cinema that was showing the anti-Islamic film suddenly was shook by an earthquake and crashed to the ground." And I was thinking, look, it's crap. It's 13 minutes long. It was not on at the fucking cinema. Get a clue. Come on, at least know what you're complaining about.
But I mean,
Actually, it did have a showing in a cinema in California.
No, but this photo was from the earthquake in Chile.
Well, God works or Allah works in mysterious ways. Maybe he was just sort of like a little bit sleepy as he's spinning around on his throne, and he sort of like missed with his bolt.
Yeah, but it shows you the level of dishonesty that these people have. They will stop at nothing to put this through, to get the message there, and they will abuse anything that they can, even if it's just a cheap shot, really.
Hole in the Wall Theater plays this film, and a building in Chile is destroyed by God, and all the people are like, "Híjole, why are we being punished? We don't understand." God has really bad aim sometimes, it seems. Yeah, I'm sorry. To answer your, I'm sorry if you don't mind, Charlie. To answer your core question, it's actually been something I've been thinking about more and more. The rise of religious populism recently in the Muslim world, and the never-ending stock ticker. You know what I mean? Like remember those old-fashioned stock tickers back before the crash of '07, where you just constantly get the ticker out. You could have that, but with various massacres and human rights abuses and riots and things. I mean, it's all bad news from much of North Africa and Southern Asia much of the time, and it can overwhelm you and think, well, no offense, I don't mean these folks any harm, but is there like a force field that we can put up so they can do their thing and we can do our thing, and just it really gets quite depressing, and you wonder if there's any future for them that's going to be even remotely positive, and a future in the relation between Muslim and non-Muslim. I'd like to think that in the long run, that this is just a phase, but time will tell.
Well, I think it goes further than that. I genuinely think this is a very serious issue. It's not just relationships. It's about the future of mankind as a species. If we cannot get along with each other, if people are going to be so intolerant, there is a huge problem.
You got a comment?
You're muted. Your microphone is muted.
I have to do some lip reading.
Right, can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yeah.
A day or two ago, there was some incident in Birmingham, and people were putting on Facebook and stuff, "Oh, I'm stuck in Birmingham, the police have cordoned it off, I can't leave, I don't know what's going on." And basically, the whole Bullring, the shopping centre in Birmingham, had been shut down, and people weren't allowed to go in or come out. And there were loads of police there. And the two options that I remember thinking were, it's either Muslims or Apple fans, because it was the same day that Apple was releasing the iPhone 5. So either it's going to be followers of Mohammed complaining, or followers of Steve Jobs being blindly led to buy a new product that they don't need. But in either case, it was too many people following an individual that really they shouldn't have been following.
I'm going to sign off. Captain Disguise, thanks for posting that video. I think it was a very well-researched video. I'll see you guys.
Thank you for coming, Charles.
Thanks a lot.
And, I actually think that we were 10 minutes late, and now we're 5 minutes over. So unless someone has something really remarkable to talk about or say, I think we're going to wrap it up.
Yeah. By the way,
I'd like to say something.
Yes, please.
I can't resist having a go at Hamza. What a dishonest, duplicitous little shit he is.
You need to stand in the queue.
In relation to the, it's Tom Holland, isn't it? I've got the name right. Who made the video? I saw again on the BBC website, a critique about it or commentary about it, and guess who they invited to speak on the other side, so to speak? Hamza Tzortzis and the IERA. And I just thought, holy shit. Yeah.
Oh, goodness. Oh, what's their phone number? Can't I go there and call and ask?
Yeah.
It was a written article on the BBC website.
Well, weren't they claiming in that article that Holland claimed that Muhammad didn't mention Mecca, or that Holland claimed Muhammad didn't exist, or something? They said a bunch of things about the documentary that simply weren't true.
Yeah,
shocking, right?
The common mistake that everyone else was making, which is Tom Holland said, apart from an ambiguous mention in the Quran, a single ambiguous mention in the Quran, Mecca is not mentioned once, and it's not mentioned as a holy place. All the Quran says is some people met in Mecca and they didn't have a fight. It doesn't say anything about it being the Qibla or anything like that at all. And that's what he said. And then you had people saying, yes, the Quran does mention Mecca, it's in this verse. And that's the exact verse he said was ambiguous and didn't say that it was a place of worship. And what I really love is there was, I don't remember who it was, but some other online Islamic group had put an article up refuting Tom Holland. And they said, yes, it's also mentioned, I think it was in chapter 33, verse 6, Mecca is mentioned there as well. If you look at it, the Quran actually says the holy place or something like that. And then Pictol has put in brackets Mecca. So these people, they've read the Pictol translation, saw what he wrote in the brackets and thought, look, it says Mecca in the Quran. That really cracked.
Well, one sad thing that I think is happening is that the people who are deconstructing the history of Islam are people who are non-Muslims. You don't have any secular people within Islam who are doing, well-researched, objective looks at the history of their own religion. In the West, you even see people who are part of the church who you would swear were atheists, who were just, really dissecting the history of Christianity in an objective way. But I don't think that they're familiar with that way of looking at their own religion. They don't have the introspection. They can't look at it as though they're looking in a mirror and see what is Islam and where did it come from.
There are people who are doing that, but they're far and few between.
And they need to keep an extremely low profile.
And they should
look at the Professor Syed we had on here. I mean, he was the one who said Muslims are backward. He said Muslims are not used to critical thinking. He says Muslims are stupid, retarded, and everything, and he wants to change it.
I don't think those were his exact words, but...
Well, I'm paraphrasing now. And he said he is all for changing that, and he says they should go back to their own glory, the old glory that they had during the Arabic golden ages, and that is what he is doing. But he's one of the very few people.
And there's the problem. There's the problem that even many moderate to liberal Muslims still have this fantasy that they can turn their civilization into a permanent Renaissance fair. You might go to, a live-action role-playing thing or a Renaissance fair here and say, okay, thee and thou, and grab my meat and my you might go to that hotel and casino in Vegas where you eat a little miniature chicken and the knights fight. That's fun for a day, but life really wasn't so great back in the days of Charlemagne or, the Celtic king that King Arthur was based off of. Life was brutal and short and unpleasant in all kinds of ways. And, the romanticism with which especially the Orthodox caliphs are regarded it's at the core of why this self-destructive process keeps repeating itself. Even people in the very liberal range of Muslim society seem to venerate the medieval society. I mean, and here's the thing. You look at the value systems. I had a conversation with someone not too long ago. I said, look, I'm not vilifying the ethics and morals laid down in the Quran or the stories that are attributed to Muhammad because they're all typical of that time and place. If you take anybody who is on the panel, in the chat, watching the show later, if you go back through our family trees, each of us have relatives who once upon a time were slaughtering their enemies on a battlefield and putting their heads on spikes, okay? Every civilization went through this phase. Not every civilization says, yes, we should go back to the days of Alexander the Great or Genghis Khan and live according to that system. But unfortunately, the doublethink involved just means that people like Dr. Syed or some of the more liberal apologists, they will just go down in history as being Muslim Trotskyists, who naively help much more conservative extreme elements get into power, even though they may not be men of violence themselves at all. Rationalizer, you have something?
Yeah, it's this whole golden age of Islam thing. It just seems that Allah's approach meant that humanity kept screwing up all the time because they didn't know what he wanted, and humans kept lying to them. And then Muhammad came along and he struggled a lot, and then things were good for a couple of decades, and then everything went shitty again. And it just seems that Allah is everywhere and Sharia is nowhere. It's such a major failing. I'd also like to make known a standing invitation that I've got with Hamza Tzortzis to have a Skype debate with me, which we'll record and put on the internet, which he did originally accept, but then after going on a Magic Sandwich show, he then changed his mind and declined. And since then, we have spoken on Skype, and he did say, I think it might be possible to have this Skype debate after all, but since then, he's not replied to any queries that I've sent to him asking him for this debate. So I just wanted to reiterate to Hamza or to the people that are in contact with Hamza that might be watching, the challenge from me still stands to have a Skype debate recorded with him on his talk, how we know that the Quran is truly from Allah.
I want to say one thing to what you just said, Rationalizer. There's another thing that Islam needs right now, including secular dissection or deconstruction of their religion from Islam, from the point of view of a Muslim. The other thing they need to do is they need to start looking at their history, not as though they were all a bunch of savage barbarians until Muhammad came and straightened them out. They had some amazing civilizations in the Arabian Peninsula. And quite frankly, the Arabian Peninsula itself is really a remarkable place, because if you go back as far as the last ice age, it was a savanna, and it was heavily populated. And I knew a geomorphologist who worked over there, and he said you could go in a helicopter and you could look down on the gravel plains and you could see rings of stone. And those rings of stone were ancient fireplace hearths that since the drying out of the savanna have dropped down into just a ring of stone. And if you go around those rings of stone, you drop down, you look and see what's around there, you'll find a cache of stone tools. And some of these stone tools and some of these cultures that you can see evidence of date back to hundreds of thousands of years. But even in recent history, just prior to the Islamic movement, there were some amazing civilizations, especially around Syria and Jordan and around the Levant. And this notion that the whole world was in chaos, everybody was barbarians until Muhammad came along, needs to be abandoned. They need to start looking at their history, and I think that that's going to open up their minds to get away from this delusion that Muhammad came and instructed mankind how to really live. No, there were people who were living before that and doing quite well and developing civilizations and cities and cultures. So that would be also something else I think that they need to do.
I think part of that misconception is that Muslims call time before Muhammad the age of ignorance, and you just look at what the Greeks were doing, like hundreds of years before Muhammad was even born, and it would seem that they'd invented the first computer, in the BCE era. This was not an age of ignorance. What they mean by the age of ignorance is they were in an age of ignorance as to what Muhammad told them was real, as in stuff about smokeless fire, jinns, which they all believed in. Muhammad confirmed it was true. The Christians have got corrupted scriptures, so they were in ignorance. Muhammad set them right. And basically what they really mean by an age of ignorance is it was the age before Muhammad popped along and told them what was real and what wasn't, despite the fact that he got a lot of it wrong.
You know, it's kind of funny getting back to Hamza's argument about no influence from the Greeks. The Christians were all Greek or Syriac. That was a Hellenistic religion, and all the Bibles were, you know, translations of the Septuagint with, you know, the New Testament. So if Muhammad knew about people of the book, then, well, he knew about Greek culture. So
yeah, of course. On the one hand, they're arguing that there's no Roman influence, and then on the other hand, he's arguing that all of their scriptures about Jesus being the Son of God are incorrect, and that was all based on a bloody thing that the Romans came up with. So how can they have corrupted scriptures that were corrupted by the Romans, yet at the same time have no effect, no interaction with Jews and Christians? It's such an absolute nonsense.
Okay, well, we're way over time now. I'm trying to keep our episodes down to 2 hours and not succeeding. We've been conferring with other people who have shows of a skeptical venue, and there may be some rescheduling in our future, or there may be some rescheduling for them. We don't know. We will keep you posted. If you're subscribed to our YouTube channel, the Jinn and Tonic Show at YouTube, we will keep you posted and try to be considerate and avail you at least a week ahead of time when we will next be on. Okay, but that is still in discussion. Thank you very much to all of our contributors. Thank you very much to Captain Disguise, and you know, we certainly wish you the best of luck with your the success of your dissertation. Thank you, DPR Jones, for joining us. Our regular panelist, Kling, of course, is gone. Rationalizer, stop spamming. Thank you, as always, and Charles for joining us this week. We will see you soon. We don't know exactly when. Salam alaikum. Take care.
Thank you very much.